She cornered herself, technically. That was the honest version of the story Celia Farrow would eventually tell. She had spotted Dean Paxton the moment she walked into the Vandermeer Hotel's grand ballroom for the Meridian Literary Awards. Spotted him the way a person spots a bruise they forgot they had, with that specific unwelcome recognition, and instead of walking the other way, she had frozen. 8 months of getting over him, 8 months of working late and eating takeout alone and convincing herself she was fine, and one glimpse of him in a navy tuxedo by the champagne display was enough to make her feel like a size 18 woman in a room that had been designed for someone half her width. The Meridian was the publishing industry's biggest night. As senior acquisitions editor at Ashgate and Lawn, Celia had no choice but to attend. She had told herself all week she could handle it. She had been wrong. Celia Farrow was 31 years old, sharp-tongued in the best way, the kind of editor who could read 50 pages of a manuscript and tell you exactly which sentence was the one that would make a stranger cry on a subway. She had built her career on instinct and precision, had a list of New York Times bestsellers to her name that most acquisitions editors, twice her age, would envy. She wore her dark hair up, kept her lipstick red, and she had long since learned that her size 18 body was not the problem in any room she walked into. Dean Paxton had spent 2 years trying to convince her otherwise. He was a literary agent at the Halcyon Agency, brilliant in the way that men who know they are charming tend to be, selectively, strategically, and always in service of himself. He had told Celia he loved her. He had told her she was remarkable. He had also, in the end, told her that her physical presentation didn't align with the personal brand he was building, that the authors he was signing wanted to see a certain kind of couple at their launch parties, that she must understand it wasn't personal. He had said all of that in the same calm, measured tone he used in contract negotiations. Then he had started dating a fitness influencer named Kylie, who had 300,000 Instagram followers and collarbones, like a sculptor's afterthought. Tonight, Dean was receiving the Meridian Award for Literary Agent of the Year. Celia had been holding a glass of sparkling water and quietly congratulating herself on getting through the cocktail hour without making eye contact with him when he materialized at her elbow. Celia. The way he said her name had always been a kind of performance, warm enough to sound generous, careful enough to remind her that the warmth was a gift he could revoke. You look, well. The pause before well did exactly what he intended it to do. She turned to face him. His eyes swept her figure in that practiced, clinical way she remembered. Not leering, which would have been easier to dismiss, but appraising. Like she was a manuscript he was deciding whether to take on. Kylie stood at his elbow in a white slip dress that cost more than Celia's monthly rent, looking at her with the particular blankness of someone who has been told just enough to feel superior. Dean, Celia's voice came out steadier than she expected. Congratulations on the award. Thank you. He tilted his head. I didn't know you were coming solo again. I heard you've been. He paused, manufactured sympathy sliding across his features like a filter. Well, it's hard at a certain point. Meeting someone, I know you've been putting the work in. Putting the work in, as though she were a renovation project. I'm not here solo, Celia said. The words came out before she had decided to say them. Dean's expression shifted, only slightly, a micro-adjustment around the eyes. Is that right? It was not a question, it was a challenge, and Celia's mouth had written a check she had no idea how to cash. She's right. The voice came from her left, low, unhurried, the kind of voice that had clearly never needed to compete for a room's attention, because rooms had always simply gone quiet on their own. Celia turned. The man standing beside her was tall enough that she had to adjust her sightline. He was built like someone who had once been in a profession that required physical consequence, now dressed in a black suit that had been made for him specifically because off the rack would have been an insult, dark hair, a jaw that looked as though it had been held in a permanent state of evaluation, and eyes, grey-green, cool as lake water in November, that were currently fixed on Dean with the mild, patient expression of a man who had already calculated every possible outcome of the next 60 seconds and found all of them manageable. Celia had seen him across the room earlier, Riordan Kane. She knew who he was the way everyone in publishing knew who he was. Kane Capital had quietly taken equity stakes in 4 of the largest independent publishing houses in the country, and Riordan himself had become a fixture at industry events, without ever quite explaining why. He was rumored to have attended 3 universities. He was confirmed to have never granted a single media interview. He was the kind of man who made publicists nervous and CFOs extremely attentive. He was also, as of this exact moment, standing so close to Celia that she could smell the cedar and cool mineral scent of his cologne, and his hand was resting at the small of her back with a proprietary ease that suggested he had been doing it for years. She had no idea why he was doing this. She also, with Dean's eyes narrowing in front of her, did not particularly care. "Riordan Kane," he said, offering Dean a handshake that was perfectly calibrated. Firm enough to assert, brief enough to dismiss. "And you are?" Dean recovered quickly. He always did. "Dean Paxton, Halcyon Agency. Tonight's honoree, actually." The smile was reflexive, the one he used when he needed to remind people of his status. "I didn't realize Celia was." "She doesn't announce me," Riordan said simply. "That's not how we work." Dean looked between them. Something shifted in his face. The first fracture in the polished surface. "Right, well, good to meet you." He glanced at Celia one more time, that same clinical sweep as though trying to locate the variable that wasn't adding up. "Enjoy the evening." He left. Kylie followed, the white dress disappearing into the crowd. Celia exhaled very slowly. Riordan's hand dropped from her back. He turned to look at her, and there was nothing readable in his expression. Not amusement, not annoyance, not the expectation of gratitude. "Walk with me," he said. It was not a request. He took her to the quieter perimeter of the ballroom, near the tall windows overlooking Park Avenue, and he listened while she explained, in the clipped professional tone she used when she was embarrassed, what had just happened and who Dean Paxton was. Riordan said nothing while she spoke. He simply looked at her with an attention that was almost discomforting, as though she were the only thing in the room worth monitoring. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You need him to believe it for the rest of the evening," Riordan said. Not a question. "I know it's ridiculous. Forget I said anything, I have a condition." Celia stopped. "Sorry?" Riordan set his glass down on the windowsill and looked at her with that same measured calm. "The Department of Justice has been conducting a financial review of 3 of my portfolio companies. It's routine and it will conclude in my favor, but the optics of a man like me appearing at events like this alone, without context, makes their lawyers creative." A pause. "I need to present as a man with a personal life. A woman like you, an established professional with no connection to my business interests, provides that." Celia stared at him. "You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" "Fiancé," he said. "It's more convincing." "You want me to pretend to be your fiancé? For 6 weeks, 3 public events. I'll need you available at a moment's notice for certain appearances." He met her eyes. "In exchange, I will ensure that Dean Paxton does not make you feel like that again, tonight or any other night." It was, objectively, the strangest conversation she had ever had at a gala. She thought about Dean's pause before "well." She thought about Kylie's comfortable blankness. She thought about 8 months of convincing herself she was fine. "Deal," she said. The first thing Riordan did the following morning was send a car to her apartment in Gramercy. It took her to a building on the Upper East Side. Not his office, she learned, but his private residence on the 36th floor. She arrived expecting a contract or a briefing. What she found was a woman named Petra, a personal stylist with the calm efficiency of a surgical nurse. and 3 rolling racks of clothing that had apparently materialized overnight. Celia looked at the racks, then at Petra. "He sent me here to—" "He said you'd fight it," Petra said, without looking up from her tablet. "He also said to tell you this isn't about changing anything. It's about having options." Celia ran her fingers along the garments. There was no black. She checked twice. Not a single piece of black clothing on any of the 3 racks. Instead, a deep burgundy gown with a structured bodice, a cobalt blue suit with wide lapels, an emerald wrap dress that pooled silk the color of a summer forest, colors she had been steering away from for years without ever quite deciding to. She took the emerald dress into the bathroom, put it on, looked in the mirror for a long moment. Then she walked back out with her arms crossed over her midsection, the way she always did when she felt exposed. Riordan was sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop, a cup of coffee going cold beside it, and he looked up when she appeared. His eyes moved over her once. Not the clinical survey Dean had perfected, but something different, something that registered. He stood, crossed the room, and gently took hold of her wrists, pulling her arms away from her body. "Don't," he said quietly. "I look." "You look like yourself," he said, "which is what you've been hiding." The words landed differently than she expected. Not a compliment designed to charm, an observation he'd been waiting to make. "I haven't exactly had encouragement in that direction," Celia said, aiming for dry humor and landing somewhere closer to honesty. "I know." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He let go of her wrists. "You'll wear the emerald Thursday night." Thursday was the Kane Capital annual stakeholder reception at the Pierre, which turned out to be a room full of people whose names she had read in Forbes, and who all, without exception, looked at Riordan with a very specific kind of wary deference. They walked in together, and Celia understood for the first time what it meant to enter a room with someone whose presence was its own weather system. The crowd adjusted. Conversations paused and reoriented. Riordan moved through it all with his hand resting at the small of her back, introducing her by name. Just her name. No qualifier, no explanation. With the ease of someone who had simply decided she belonged there. She did not see Dean until she was standing at the bar. "How much is he paying you?" She turned. Dean was there, drink in hand, his composure fraying slightly at the edges. He had always gotten mean when he felt outmaneuvered. "I'm sorry." Riordan Kane. His voice was low, sharpened with wounded pride trying to pass itself off as concerns. "Do you know what people say about him? You don't belong in whatever this is. You never had the—" He stopped himself, but not before the word formed behind his teeth. "Say it," Celia said. "You know what I mean." "Say it, Dean." He opened his mouth. He didn't finish. A hand closed over his shoulder, not violently, not even roughly, but with a controlled pressure that made Dean go very still, the way a small animal goes still when it understands something larger is nearby. Riordan was behind him. "She asked you to say it," Riordan said very quietly. "I'd like to hear it as well." Around them, the nearest cluster of conversations had gone carefully, attentively silent. Dean swallowed. "I was just—" "You were just explaining to my fiancée," Riordan said. The word arrived without softness, stated like a legal term, which somehow made it more absolute than sentiment ever could have. Why she doesn't belong somewhere. In my building, at my event, in a dress I chose for her. He released Dean's shoulder, smoothed the lapel of Dean's jacket with 2 deliberate fingers, as one straightens the collar of someone they have thoroughly dismissed. "Finish the sentence, Paxton. I have all evening." Dean did not finish the sentence. He also, Celia noticed, did not look at her again. The trouble started 40 minutes later. She was at the far end of the reception, absorbed in a conversation with one of Riordan's portfolio directors about a manuscript she'd acquired, genuinely comfortable, talking about something she actually knew, when the concussion moved through the air. Subtle. One of the narrow service corridor doors at the back of the room shuddered on its frame. Riordan was at her side in under 10 seconds. "We're leaving," he said. He said it so calmly she almost didn't register the way his right hand had shifted to the inside of his jacket. "What?" "Now, Celia." He moved her through the crowd without appearing to rush, one arm around her, steering her toward the side exit with the quiet precision of someone who had mapped the room before they'd ever walked into it. Behind them she heard raised voices, a crash of something overturned, and then Riordan's head of security, a lean, sharp-faced man named Milo, was flanking them on the left. "Two from the Vasquez network," Milo said under his breath. "Service entrance." Handled. Working on it. They were through the side door and into a private elevator before Celia's brain fully caught up with her body. The doors closed. Riordan released her, turned, and she saw a dark line spreading through the fabric at his left forearm, a cut from glass or a blade, and his face betrayed nothing about it except a slight tension around the eyes. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's minor. You're bleeding on your suit. The suit can be replaced." She looked at him. He looked back at her, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and Celia became acutely aware that this was not, in fact, a publishing gala anymore. "Who is the Vasquez network?" she asked. Something moved behind his eyes, calculation, and then a decision about how much to tell her. "A competing interest," he said. "They've been attempting to locate me in uncontrolled environments for 3 months. Tonight they got closer than they should have." The elevator reached the lobby. Milo was already outside with a car. In the back seat, in the specific quiet that follows a crisis, Celia pulled the silk scarf from her bag, a gift from a grateful author, expensive and too nice to use as a bandage, and pressed it against his forearm without asking. Riordan looked down at her hands. "You're ruining that," he said. "I'll put it on your tab," she said. Something crossed his face that she had not seen there before. Almost, not quite, but almost, a smile. He told her the rest of it in the safe apartment in Tribeca, while a doctor on call finished dressing his arm, and Celia sat in a chair by the window with her heels off and the emerald dress pooling around her bare feet. Riordan Kane was not, technically, a criminal. He was something more complicated. A man who had spent 15 years building a private intelligence infrastructure that certain very powerful and very illegal organizations found threatening. The Vasquez network was one of them. They had been making noise for months. The DOJ review was, as he'd said, routine. The thing that was not routine was that someone had told the Vasquez network where Riordan would be standing at 9:15 in a building that was otherwise secure. "Only 12 people had my confirmed schedule for tonight," Riordan said. His voice was perfectly even, terrifyingly even. Celia looked at him. How many of those 12 were at the reception? 3. A silence. "Dean was there," she said slowly. Riordan met her eyes. "His agency has a financing relationship with one of my portfolio companies. He had access to a surface-level event calendar." A pause. Milo pulled security footage. 22 minutes before the incident, Paxton left the main reception and made a phone call from the coat check. Celia did not need him to explain the rest. Her brain constructed it without assistance. Dean had looked at the man defending her and decided the risk to Riordan was an acceptable price for what he got back in return. "He didn't care that I was standing next to you," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she expected. "No," Riordan said, "he didn't." What happened to Dean Paxton in the following 10 days was not violent. Riordan was not a man who wasted energy on the obvious. Within 72 hours, 3 of Halcyon Agency's most significant clients, all of them connected, through multiple layers of holding companies, to Kane Capital's portfolio, quietly terminated their representation agreements. The stated reason was a breach of confidentiality. The specific breach was documented, certified, and delivered to Halcyon senior partners in a binder that Riordan's legal team had prepared with almost artistic thoroughness. Dean was asked to resign his partnership. His name was removed from the agency's website on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, the industry had moved on in the way it moves on from people who were never quite as indispensable as they believed. The federal charges came on Thursday: conspiracy to commit assault, reckless endangerment. The evidence, delivered anonymously to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, included the security footage, phone records, a wire transfer, and a text message Dean had been confident enough in his own cleverness to send unencrypted. Celia watched the news coverage on her laptop in her own apartment. She watched Dean's face on the screen, that careful, constructed composure finally coming apart, and she waited to feel something other than a profound, exhausted relief. She felt nothing for him, had not, she realized, for longer than she'd admitted to herself. The message from Riordan came that evening. The arrangement has run its course. The DOJ review closed today. You're no longer required. Thank you for your assistance. Celia read it twice. Required. She set her phone down, picked it up again, put it in her bag, then took it back out. The emerald dress was hanging in her closet. She'd had it dry cleaned, returned it to its garment bag. And she looked at it for a moment before she started making a mental inventory of what she'd left at the Tribeca apartment, cataloguing it so she wouldn't have to linger when she went to collect things. She was practical. She was fine. She had known what this was. She was in the lobby of her building the next morning, bag in hand, when the car pulled up outside. Not a message, not Milo, Riordan himself in the back seat, which she could see because the door was already open. Celia stopped walking. He stepped out. He was in a dark coat, no tie, and he looked, for the first time since she had known him, like a man who had stayed awake for reasons that had nothing to do with business. I said the wrong thing, he said. Celia said nothing. I said the arrangement had run its course. What I meant was, he stopped. Riordan Kine, who had spoken in complete measured sentences for the entirety of their acquaintance, stopped mid-thought and looked at her with an expression she had not seen before, unguarded, careful in a different way than usual, careful the way a person is careful with something that matters. I have not wanted anything in a long time, Celia. I had convinced myself I didn't know how anymore, and then you pressed a silk scarf against my arm in the back of a car and told me to put it on my tab. Celia's throat was doing something she preferred to ignore. That's a low bar, she said. You're also the only person who has ever told me, to my face, that I was bleeding on my suit, as though that were the primary concern. It was a nice suit. It was, he agreed. He reached into his coat pocket. What he produced was small, a ring box, dark velvet, and he held it without ceremony, without theatre, because Riordan Kine did not perform. He opened it. The stone was a deep, vivid emerald, cushion-cut, set in platinum so clean it looked as though it had been grown directly around the gem, the same color as the dress he had chosen for her, for the night he had first looked at her, the way she had always deserved to be looked at. The arrangement is over, he said. I don't want an arrangement. He met her eyes, and there was nothing in his gaze but the specific, direct, terrifying sincerity of a man who had decided to say a true thing out loud. I want you, exactly as you are, standing anywhere in the world in any color you choose, not hiding a single thing. Celia looked at the ring. She looked at him. She thought about the night he had pulled her arms away from her body and said, "Don't," not like a command, but like a correction, like she had been wrong about something and he intended to fix it. She thought about how she had never, in 31 years, had someone treat her self-erasure as a problem worth solving. This is still insane, she said. Yes, he agreed. You know that. I do. I'm keeping the scarf, she said. Something moved across his face that was definitively, this time, a smile. Keep whatever you want. She took the ring. Riordan Kane, the man that federal agencies and private networks had spent years trying to pin down, slid it onto her finger and then, without any of the performance that moment might have warranted, simply pulled her against him, steady and certain and unequivocal, the way he did everything that mattered. Celia Farrow had walked into the Meridian Gala 3 weeks ago, trying to survive the evening. She walked out of her building that morning as someone who had stopped surviving and started claiming herself, her space, the life she had been quietly told she wasn't shaped right for. She did not look behind her. There was nothing back there worth looking at anymore.